The dust cloud rose behind the wagon as Natalie Preston watched everything she had ever known burn to ashes in the distance. Her father's ranch consumed by flames that painted the Arizona sky orange and black. She sat rigid on the hard wooden seat, her mother's Bible clutched in trembling hands, wondering why God would allow such devastation when she had prayed so fervently for protection just hours before the fire started. The scorching August heat of 1882 seemed to mock her grief as she fled toward Mineral Park, a small mining town nestled in the Curbit Mountains, where she knew no one and had nothing waiting except the desperate hope of survival. Her father had died 3 months earlier from pneumonia, leaving Natalie and her mother to run the cattle ranch alone. They had managed through sheer determination, waking before dawn and working until their hands bled. Then her mother had fallen ill 2 weeks ago, the same sickness taking her within days. Natalie had buried her beside her father, on the hill overlooking the pasture, standing alone as she said prayers that felt like they disappeared into an empty sky. She had tried to keep going, tried to maintain what her parents had built, but the drought had been merciless. The cattle had grown thin. The hired hands had left seeking work elsewhere. And then, just yesterday, a lightning strike during a brief thunderstorm had ignited the dry grass near the barn. She had fought the flames with buckets of precious water from the nearly dry well, her arms screaming with exhaustion, her lungs burning from smoke. But the fire had spread too quickly, consuming the barn, then the house, then everything. She had managed to save the old mare and this wagon, grabbing what few possessions she could carry before the flames forced her away. Now, at 22 years old, Natalie found herself with nothing but the clothes on her back, a few family photographs, her mother's Bible, and a wagon pulled by a horse too old to be worth much. The road to Mineral Park wound through rocky terrain, dotted with Joshua trees and mesquite. The town had grown around the silver mines discovered a few years back, and Natalie had heard it was rough but prosperous. She had no plan beyond finding work, any work that would keep her fed and sheltered. The Bible in her lap felt heavier than it should, a weight of broken promises and unanswered prayers. She had believed so firmly that faith would see her through, that God had a plan. But what plan could possibly include losing everyone and everything? By the time she reached Mineral Park, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The town stretched along the main street, a collection of wooden buildings that included a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church with a modest steeple, and various other establishments that serviced the miners and their families. Natalie guided her exhausted mare toward what looked like a livery stable at the edge of town, her throat tight with unshed tears and her body aching from the long journey. A tall man emerged from the stable as she approached, his hat pushed back to reveal sandy brown hair and eyes the color of creek water. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, his worn leather vest and dusty boots marking him as a working man. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. "Evening, miss," he called out, his voice warm despite the weariness in her face that must have been obvious. "You looking to board your horse?" Natalie climbed down from the wagon, her legs nearly buckling after hours of sitting. "Yes, but I need to know your rates first. I have limited funds." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her soot-stained dress and the hollow look in her dark eyes. "Ethan Walsh," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I run this stable along with doing ranch work around town. Your horse looks like she could use some good feed and rest." "Natalie Preston." She shook his hand, surprised by the gentleness in his calloused grip. "I can pay for tonight, but I will need to find work quickly." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze moving to the meager belongings in her wagon. "Where are you coming from?" "A ranch about 20 miles south. It burned yesterday. There is nothing left." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, despite her effort to remain composed. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I am sorry. That is a hard loss." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Tell you what, you can board your horse here tonight on credit. Tomorrow we will figure out the rest. Right now, you look like you need a meal and a place to sleep more than you need to worry about my fees." Natalie's first instinct was to refuse charity, but exhaustion overwhelmed pride. "Thank you. I will pay you back as soon as I find employment." "I do not doubt it." Ethan began unhitching the mare from the wagon. "The boarding house 2 buildings down has clean rooms, and Mrs. Chen serves good food. Tell her I sent you." As he worked, Natalie found herself watching the sure movements of his hands, the way he spoke softly to the tired horse. There was something steady about him, something that reminded her of her father's calm presence. She pushed the thought away quickly. She had not come to Mineral Park looking for comfort or companionship. She needed to survive, to rebuild somehow, even though the very foundation of her faith felt like it had crumbled along with everything else. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Ethan asked as he led the mare into the stable. "Anything honest. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, work with animals. I helped run a cattle ranch for 3 months. That is more capable than most." He emerged from the stable and gestured down the street. "Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned needing help, and the church always needs someone to help with the Sunday meals and cleaning. Pastor Reynolds is a good man." Natalie felt her jaw tighten at the mention of the church. "I will try the general store first." If Ethan noticed her reaction, he did not comment. "Come on, I will walk you to the boarding house. It is not safe for a woman alone after dark in a mining town." They walked together down the dusty main street as the last light faded from the sky. Miners were emerging from the shafts, heading toward the saloon with coins jingling in their pockets. A few looked at Natalie with interest that made her uncomfortable, but Ethan's presence beside her seemed to discourage any approaches. "How long have you been in Mineral Park?" she asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to fill the silence. "About 4 years. Came out from Texas after my parents passed. I worked in the mines for a while, but I prefer working with horses and cattle. The stable work is steady, and I pick up ranch jobs around the area." He glanced at her. "It is a decent town once you get to know people. Rough around the edges, but most folks are fair." "Do you have family here?" "No, just me. My sister married and moved to California. We write letters sometimes." There was a loneliness in his words that matched something in Natalie's own heart, though she tried not to acknowledge it. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story building with a painted sign that read, "Chen's Rooms and Meals." The scent of cooking food drifted through the open windows, making Natalie's stomach clench with sudden hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Ethan opened the door for her, and they stepped into a clean front room with a desk and several chairs. A woman in her 40s appeared from a back room, her black hair pulled into a neat bun. She smiled when she saw Ethan. "Mr. Walsh, good evening. What brings you here?" "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Preston. She just arrived in town and needs a room. I told her you run the best boarding house in Mineral Park." Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes took in Natalie's appearance with the same assessment Ethan had made earlier. "The only boarding house," she corrected with a slight smile. "But yes, I have a room available. Includes 2 meals a day, $3 a week, paid in advance." Natalie reached into the small pouch tied at her waist, counting out the precious coins. She had maybe $15 total, money she had hidden in the house that had miraculously survived in the metal box she had grabbed. $3 would leave her with 12, and she needed that for food and supplies until she found work. "Could I pay for 3 nights instead?" she asked quietly. "I should have employment by then." Mrs. Chen hesitated, then nodded. $1.30 for 3 nights, 2 meals a day. The transaction completed, Mrs. Chen showed Natalie to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair. A single window looked out over the street. After weeks of frantic work and days of loss, the simple room felt like a sanctuary. "Supper is in 30 minutes, Mrs. Chen said before leaving. "Come down when you are ready." Alone finally, Natalie sank onto the bed and let the tears come. They poured out silently, her shoulders shaking with the force of grief she had held back all day. She cried for her parents, for the home that no longer existed, for the life she had planned that had turned to ash. And she cried because the prayers she had whispered desperately while fighting the flames had gone unanswered, because God had felt absent when she needed him most. After the tears subsided, she washed her face in the basin and changed into the one clean dress she had packed. It was a simple brown cotton dress, worn but serviceable. She brushed out her long, dark hair and pinned it up, then looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face looked thinner than it had a month ago, her eyes shadowed, but she was alive, and she would find a way forward, even if she had to do it without faith to sustain her. The dining room downstairs held 4 tables, 3 of them occupied by men who looked like miners or workers. Ethan sat alone at the 4th table, and he gestured for Natalie to join him when she appeared. "I hope you do not mind the company," he said as she sat down. "I eat here most evenings since I'm not much of a cook." "I do not mind." The truth was, she was grateful not to sit alone under the stares of the other diners. Mrs. Chen brought out plates of beef stew with fresh bread, and Natalie ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was simple but delicious, and she felt strength returning to her body with each mouthful. "I was thinking," Ethan said between bites, "about work for you. The Patterson store is a good option, but I also know a rancher about 5 miles out, Jack Morrison, who lost his housekeeper last month. She got married and moved away. He needs someone to cook and keep the house clean. He has a few ranch hands, so it would be cooking for maybe 6 men total. He pays fair and provides room and board." Natalie considered this. A ranch job would mean leaving town, but it also meant she would not have to pay for lodging, which would let her save more money. Would it be proper, me living on a ranch with men? Morrison is about 60 years old and as proper as they come. His wife passed a few years back, but he is respectful, and there is a separate small house on the property where the housekeeper stays. You would have your own space and privacy. Ethan met her eyes. "I work there sometimes, helping with the cattle and horses. I would not suggest it if I thought it was not safe. Why are you helping me?" The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "You do not know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I remember what it was like to arrive here alone with nothing. A man named George helped me get my start, gave me work and a place to sleep until I could afford my own place. He died 2 years ago, but I figure the best way to honor that kindness is to pass it along." He paused. "And maybe because I can see you are hurting, and I know what that feels like." His honesty disarmed her. She had expected platitudes or expectations of something in return, but his words rang true. "I would be interested in meeting Mr. Morrison about the position. I am heading out there tomorrow morning to help with some fence repair. You could ride out with me, meet him, and see if it suits you." They finished their meal talking about practical things, the daily rhythms of ranch work, the best places to buy supplies in town. Ethan had an easy way of talking that required no effort from her, filling silences without demanding she contribute more than she could manage. By the time she returned to her room, Natalie felt marginally less alone than she had that morning. She sat on the bed and opened her mother's Bible, a habit from years of nightly reading. But the words swam before her eyes without meaning, empty phrases that failed to touch the ache in her chest. Her mother had read this Bible every day, had believed every word with absolute certainty. Where had that faith gotten her? Dead at 48, buried in a grave that was now probably covered in ash. Natalie closed the book and set it aside, feeling guilty for the bitter thoughts but unable to push them away. She lay down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town outside her window. Men shouting, a piano playing in the saloon, the occasional burst of laughter. Life continued regardless of personal tragedy. The world did not stop turning just because hers had fallen apart. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and heavy. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through the window. Natalie woke disoriented, taking a moment to remember where she was and why. The grief hit her fresh, a wave that threatened to pull her under, but she forced herself out of bed. Surviving required moving forward, one step at a time. Breakfast in the dining room was eggs and biscuits with coffee. Ethan appeared as she was finishing, dressed for work in sturdy canvas pants and a blue cotton shirt. "Ready to ride out to the Morrison Ranch?" he asked. "Yes. Let me get my things." She had not unpacked much, and within minutes she was ready. Ethan had 2 horses saddled outside, his own black gelding and a calm-looking bay mare. "This is Rosie," he said, indicating the mare. "She has a gentle temperament. I borrowed her from Morrison for the trip." Natalie had ridden since childhood, and she mounted easily despite her dress. They headed out of town as the morning heat began building, following a well-worn trail through the desert landscape. The Surbit Mountains rose in the distance, their slopes dotted with sparse vegetation. "Tell me about Mr. Morrison," Natalie said as they rode. "Jack Morrison came out here in the 60s, before the mining boom. He built his ranch from nothing, raised cattle and horses. He has maybe 200 head now, some good breeding stock. He is tough but fair, expects hard work but pays on time. His wife Clara was known for her kindness. She used to bring food to families in town when times were hard." Ethan shifted in his saddle. He has been lonely since she passed, not looking for another wife, just misses having someone around who knew her, who remembers. I think he would appreciate having someone running the house again, making it feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. The description painted a picture of a good man dealing with his own losses. Natalie could relate to that more than she wanted to admit. The Morrison Ranch appeared after about an hour of riding, a sprawling property with a main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Natalie could see several men working near the barn. The main house was built of wood and stone, 2 stories tall with a wide porch. A man emerged from the house as they approached, tall and rangy with silver hair and a weathered face. He walked with a slight limp, but moved with purpose. "Walsh," he called out in greeting. "You are here early." "Morning, Mr. Morrison. I brought someone I thought you should meet." Ethan dismounted and helped Natalie down. "This is Miss Natalie Preston. She just arrived in Mineral Park and is looking for work. I thought she might be a good fit for your housekeeper position." Morrison studied Natalie with keen blue eyes that reminded her of a hawk. "You have experience keeping house and cooking?" "Yes, sir. I ran my family's ranch house for several months, cooking for hired hands and managing all the household tasks." She met his gaze steadily. "I am a hard worker, and I learn quickly." "Where is your family now?" "Dead, sir. My parents both passed recently, and our ranch burned in a fire 2 days ago. I came to Mineral Park to start over." She said it plainly, without asking for pity. Something in Morrison's expression softened. "I am sorry for your losses. That is a heavy burden for someone so young." He gestured toward the house. "Come inside. Let me show you what the job would entail." The interior of the house was clean, but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than comfortable, and dust had gathered in corners. Morrison led her through the main floor, pointing out the kitchen, the dining room, the parlor, and his office. "I need someone who can cook 3 meals a day for myself and 5 ranch hands. They eat in the bunkhouse, so you would prepare food here and they would come get it. Breakfast at dawn, lunch at noon, supper at 6. In between, there is cleaning, laundry, mending, and general upkeep of the house. I would expect the work to be done well, but I am not unreasonable about perfection." "What about supplies? Do I plan meals and maintain inventory?" "Yes, I give you a budget each week, and you manage the purchasing. I go into town for supplies every Saturday, or you can arrange delivery from Patterson's store." He paused. "The pay is $15 a month, plus room and board. The housekeeper's cottage is behind the main house, 2 rooms with a wood stove. It is yours alone." $15 a month was more than fair, and room and board meant she could save almost all of it. "When would you need me to start?" "Today, if you are willing. I have been managing on my own, but I am tired of my own cooking, and the house needs proper attention." Natalie glanced at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. She made her decision. "I accept the position, Mr. Morrison. Thank you for the opportunity. Call me Jack. Everyone does." He extended his hand, and they shook on it. "Let me show you the cottage, and then you can start by making lunch. The men will be hungry by noon." The cottage was small but charming, with a main room that held a bed, a table, and 2 chairs, and a smaller room that could serve as storage or a workroom. It had its own small porch and a view of the mountains. After weeks of chaos, having her own space felt like an incredible luxury. Jack left her to settle in, and Ethan helped carry her few belongings from the wagon he had brought back from town. "This is a good place," Ethan said, setting down her trunk. "Jack will treat you well." "Thank you for arranging this. I know you did not have to go to such trouble for a stranger." "Maybe you will not be a stranger for long." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I will be around often, helping with the cattle work. If you need anything, just ask." After he left to join the other men working on the fence repairs, Natalie stood in her new cottage and took a deep breath. She had a job, a place to live, and a chance to rebuild. It was more than she had dared hope for yesterday. The grief still sat heavy in her chest, and the questions about faith still churned in her mind, but survival suddenly felt possible. She walked to the main house and entered the kitchen, taking stock of what was available. The pantry held basics: flour, salt, beans, some dried meat, potatoes, onions, enough to make a decent meal. She built up the fire in the large cook stove and began preparing lunch, falling into familiar rhythms that brought a strange comfort. By noon, she had prepared a large pot of potato soup with chunks of salt pork, fresh biscuits, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Jack appeared first, followed by 5 ranch hands who introduced themselves with varying degrees of shyness. They were working men, most in their 20s and 30s, weathered by outdoor labor. Ethan came in last, and his smile when he saw her made something warm unfurl in her chest, despite her determination to remain focused on work. The men ate with enthusiasm, complimenting the food between bites. It felt good to be useful, to provide something tangible that was appreciated. After they left, Natalie cleaned up the kitchen and then began the work of properly cleaning the house. She threw open windows to air out the rooms, swept and mopped floors, dusted every surface. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, giving her something to focus on besides loss. Over the following days, Natalie settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and doing laundry, made lunch, and then used her afternoons for mending, baking bread for the next day, and planning meals. The work was demanding but satisfying in a way that felt right. Jack was true to his word, treating her with respect and praising her cooking. The ranch hands were polite and appreciative, and Ethan came to the ranch nearly every day, working alongside the other men on various projects. He always made a point of stopping by the kitchen, usually with some excuse about needing water or wanting to wash up at the pump by the back door. Their conversations were brief but became a highlight of Natalie's day, something she looked forward to, even though she told herself she should not. A week after she started working at the ranch, Ethan found her hanging laundry on the line behind her cottage. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she had pushed up her sleeves and tied a kerchief over her hair. "You are making this place look like a real home again," Ethan said, leaning against the fence post. "Jack mentioned this morning that he has not eaten so well in 2 years. He is an easy man to work for." Natalie pinned up one of Jack's shirts. "I appreciate you suggesting this position. I am glad it worked out." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How are you doing? Really?" The question caught her off guard. Most people asked how she was settling in or how she liked the work, but no one had asked about her actual well-being. She continued hanging laundry, using the task as a shield. "I am managing. Staying busy helps." "And when you are not busy?" She met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there. "Then it is harder. The grief comes in waves, and the anger." "Anger at what happened?" "At what happened. At God for letting it happen. At myself for not being able to stop it." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I prayed, Ethan. I prayed so hard while I was fighting that fire. I begged God to save my home, to give me a chance, and the flames just kept coming. What is the point of faith if prayers go unanswered?" Ethan moved closer, his expression thoughtful. "I do not have easy answers for that. When my parents died within a month of each other from influenza, I was angry too. I felt abandoned by God, like I had been faithful my whole life, and this was my reward. What changed? Time, mostly, and realizing that maybe faith is not about getting what we ask for. Maybe it is about finding strength to keep going even when we do not get it." He paused. "A wise woman told me once that God does not always stop the storms, but he helps us weather them." I did not understand what she meant at the time, but I think I do now. "I do not feel that help. I just feel alone." "You are not alone." The way he said it, with such quiet certainty, made her throat tighten. Maybe that is part of how help comes, through other people who show up when we need them. She wanted to dismiss his words, to maintain the wall she had built around her heart, but something in his presence made it difficult. He stood there in the afternoon sun, this man who barely knew her, but had shown her more kindness in a week than she had any right to expect. Maybe that was worth something. "Maybe," she said softly. That evening, after supper was finished and the dishes were washed, Natalie walked out to the pasture behind her cottage. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance and the occasional whinny from the horses in the corral. The desert landscape stretched out endlessly, beautiful in its harsh way. She thought about what Ethan had said, about faith being something more than answered prayers. Her mother had possessed such certainty, such unwavering belief. Natalie had tried to hold on to that same certainty, but it had crumbled when tested. Was it possible to rebuild faith differently? Not as a shield against tragedy, but as something that helped you survive it? She did not have answers, but standing there watching the sunset, she felt something shift slightly. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the first hint that peace might be possible eventually. The following Sunday, Jack gave everyone the day off after morning chores. Natalie had baked extra bread and prepared cold food that the men could eat throughout the day, freeing her from cooking duties. She spent the morning reading in her cottage, finally opening her mother's Bible again and finding the passages less painful than before. Around midday, Ethan knocked on her door. He held his hat in his hands, looking slightly nervous. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride. There is a beautiful spot about 2 miles from here, a small canyon with a creek. It is cooler there and peaceful." Natalie hesitated. Going off alone with Ethan felt like crossing a line, acknowledging something she was not ready to face. But the cottage felt confining suddenly, and the thought of spending the afternoon in a cool canyon was appealing. "That sounds nice. Give me a moment to change into my riding clothes." They saddled horses from Jack's stock and rode out across the ranch land. Ethan led them through rocky terrain, following a path that climbed gradually into the foothills. True to his word, after about 40 minutes of riding, they descended into a small canyon where a creek ran over smooth stones. Cottonwood trees provided shade, and the temperature was noticeably cooler. They dismounted and let the horses drink from the creek. Natalie found a flat rock near the water and sat down, removing her hat and letting the breeze cool her face. Ethan sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she was aware of his presence. "This is beautiful," she said. "How did you find it?" "I was chasing a lost calf about a year ago and ended up here. I come sometimes when I need to think or just get away from town." He picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the water. Clara Morrison used to come here too, according to Jack. She would pack a lunch and spend afternoons reading by the creek. "You speak of her with such respect." Everyone who knew her did. She had this way of making people feel valued, like their troubles mattered. After my parents died and I came out here, she was one of the first people to make me feel welcome. She would invite me to Sunday dinners, would ask about my life back in Texas. He smiled at the memory. Jack loved her fiercely. When she died, something in him dimmed. He is a good man, but he is lonely in a way that work cannot fix. Natalie thought about loneliness, about the particular ache of missing someone who was gone forever. "I understand that. The loneliness. Even when I am surrounded by people, there is this emptiness. It gets easier. Not easy, but easier." Ethan turned to look at her. "You have to let people in, though. You cannot rebuild alone. What if I let people in and lose them too? Then at least you had them for a while. Is not that better than never having them at all?" His eyes held hers. "I know it is scary. I know you are hurting, but closing yourself off from connection does not protect you from pain. It just guarantees you will be lonely." His words struck deep, touching fears she had not articulated even to herself. Since the losses, she had been focused solely on survival, on not letting anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Ethan was right. That path led to a life of isolation, and she had seen where that led in her own father after he lost his parents. He had withdrawn into work, and it had taken years before he opened up enough to marry her mother. "I do not know if I know how to let people in anymore," she admitted. "Start small. Let yourself have a friend." He smiled gently. "I am a good friend. I listen well, and I am terrible at taking offense." Despite the heaviness of the conversation, Natalie found herself smiling. "You are persistent, I will give you that. It is one of my finer qualities." They spent the afternoon by the creek, talking about easier things. Ethan told her stories about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk properly, about his sister's wedding, and how he had accidentally knocked over the cake. She told him about her childhood, about her mother teaching her to cook, and her father teaching her to read the land, to know when rain was coming and when to move the cattle. As the sun began its descent, they rode back to the ranch. Natalie felt lighter than she had in weeks, as though something that had been locked tight in her chest had loosened slightly. When they reached the barn and dismounted, Ethan helped her unsaddle the mare, even though she was perfectly capable of doing it herself. "Thank you for today," Natalie said. "I needed it more than I realized." "Any time, really." He hesitated, then added, "There is a dance in town next Saturday night. The Miners Association puts it on once a month. Would you consider going with me?" Her first instinct was to refuse, to retreat back into safety. But she thought about what he had said about not closing herself off, about starting small. A dance in a public place with someone she was beginning to trust felt like a reasonable risk. Yes, I would like that. His smile was worth the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The week passed in its usual rhythms, but Natalie found herself looking forward to Saturday with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She had not been to a social event since before her father died, and the thought of being in a crowded room felt overwhelming, but she also wanted to go, wanted to do something normal and life-affirming. On Saturday evening, she put on her best dress, a deep blue cotton with a modest neckline and fitted waist. It had been her mother's, and had survived the fire because Natalie had been wearing it the day before. She brushed out her hair and let it fall in waves down her back, pinning just the sides away from her face. Looking in the small mirror, she saw traces of the person she had been before everything fell apart. Ethan arrived in a wagon at 6 o'clock, cleaned up and wearing dark pants with a white shirt and vest. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself." The ride into Mineral Park was pleasant, the evening air cooling as the sun set. They talked easily, and Natalie felt the nervousness begin to ease. When they arrived at the community hall where the dance was being held, music was already spilling out into the street. A fiddler, a guitar player, and someone on a piano were playing a lively tune, and through the windows Natalie could see couples dancing. Inside, the hall was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers. Miners and their families mixed with ranchers and townspeople, everyone dressed in their best and ready to enjoy the evening. Ethan led Natalie to the side of the room, introducing her to people he knew. Mrs. Chen was there with her husband, and she greeted Natalie warmly. Jack Morrison stood near the refreshment table, talking to other ranchers, and he nodded approvingly when he saw her. When the band started a waltz, Ethan offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" Natalie had not danced in over a year, but she let him lead her onto the floor. He was a good dancer, confident without being showy, and he held her at a proper distance that still felt intimate. They moved together smoothly, and Natalie found herself relaxing into the music and the moment. "You are a wonderful dancer," Ethan said. "My father insisted I learn. He said a lady should know how to conduct herself at social events." The memory brought both sadness and warmth. "He raised you well." They danced several dances, sometimes together, and sometimes with other partners as was customary. Natalie found herself enjoying the evening more than she had expected. The music and movement felt freeing, a reminder that life held moments of joy, even amid grief. During a break in the music, Ethan brought her a glass of lemonade, and they stepped outside for air. Other couples had the same idea, standing in small groups chatting and laughing. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. "Are you having a good time?" Ethan asked. "Yes, better than I expected, honestly." She sipped her lemonade. "I had forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy an evening." "You deserve more evenings like this." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted inside the hall. Raised voices, the sound of something crashing. Ethan moved quickly toward the door, and Natalie followed. Inside, two miners were squaring off near the refreshment table, both clearly drunk and angry about something. Other men were moving to intervene before fists started flying. Jack Morrison stepped between the two men, his voice calm but authoritative. "That is enough. Take your fight outside or sleep it off, but you are not disrupting this dance." The tension held for a moment, then one of the miners backed down, his friend pulling him toward the door. The other miner muttered something under his breath, but also left. Jack nodded to the band, and they struck up a cheerful tune as if nothing had happened. "Does that happen often?" Natalie asked as things returned to normal. "Sometimes. Mining is hard work, and men blow off steam with alcohol. Usually it does not amount to much." Ethan guided her back toward the dance floor. "Come on, do not let it ruin the evening." They danced until late, and by the time Ethan drove her back to the ranch, Natalie's feet hurt and her cheeks hurt from smiling. It had been a good night, the kind that reminded her that healing was possible, that life could hold happiness again. At her cottage, Ethan walked her to the door. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting everything in silver light. "Thank you for tonight," Natalie said. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I." Ethan stood close, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "Can I be honest with you about something?" "Of course." "I have been thinking about you since the day you arrived in Mineral Park, not just because I wanted to help, but because there is something about you that draws me in. Your strength, your resilience, The way you keep going, even when you are hurting. He met her eyes. I know the timing might not be right, and I do not want to push you towards something you are not ready for. But I care about you, Natalie, more than just as a friend. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had felt the connection between them growing, had caught herself watching for him during the day and looking forward to their conversations. But hearing him voice it made it real, made it something she had to acknowledge. I care about you too, she said quietly, but I am scared. Everything I have cared about has been taken away. What if I let myself feel something for you and lose you too? You might. Life does not come with guarantees. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. But you might also find something worth having. Is not that worth the risk? She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers smaller but no less work-worn. There was something right about the way they fit together. Maybe I can help you believe again, Ethan said softly. Not just in God or faith, but in the possibility of good things, in love and connection and building something new from the ashes. The words resonated in her chest, touching that wounded place where her faith used to live. Maybe belief was not just about God. Maybe it was about believing in people, in second chances, in the possibility of happiness after loss. I want to try, she whispered. I am still scared, but I want to try. Ethan smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That is all I am asking. We will take it slow, figure it out as we go. He squeezed her hand gently and then released it, stepping back. Good night, Natalie. Good night. She watched him walk back to the wagon and drive away before going inside her cottage. Her heart felt full in a way it had not since before the losses began. There was still grief, still questions about faith and meaning, but alongside them now was hope, small and tentative, but real. Over the following weeks, Natalie and Ethan grew closer. He came to the ranch almost daily, and they carved out time to be together. Sometimes they rode out to the canyon by the creek. Sometimes they sat on her porch in the evenings, talking while the desert cooled around them. Sometimes he helped her with tasks around the cottage, fixing a loose board or carrying water. Jack noticed, of course, and one evening he pulled Natalie aside after supper. Ethan Walsh is a good man, he said without preamble. I have known him for years, worked alongside him. He is honest, hard-working, and decent. If he is courting you, you could do far worse. Natalie felt her cheeks warm. It is still early. We are getting to know each other. Clara and I knew within a month that we would marry, Jack said, his eyes distant with memory. When you find someone who makes life better just by being in it, you do not let that go. Clara used to say that God brings people into our lives at exactly the right time, even when we think the timing is all wrong. Did you believe that? I do now. After she died, I was angry at God for taking her. But I had 25 years with her, 25 years of happiness and love. That was a gift, even if it ended too soon. He looked at her directly. Do not let fear of loss keep you from living, Natalie. That is not really living at all. His words stayed with her, echoing what Ethan had said. Everyone who cared about her seemed to be telling her the same thing, that love was worth the risk, that closing herself off guaranteed loneliness, but nothing else. In early October, Ethan took her to meet his friend George's widow, Martha, who lived in a small house on the edge of Mineral Park. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. So you are the young woman Ethan has been telling me about, Martha said, inviting them in for coffee. He says you have had a hard time of it recently. Yes, madam, I lost my parents and my home in quick succession, and your faith along with it, if I am understanding correctly. Natalie glanced at Ethan, who looked slightly embarrassed. I told her you were struggling with some questions about God. Martha has always been good at helping people work through that kind of thing. Martha poured coffee and settled into a rocking chair, studying Natalie with eyes that seemed to see more than most. What is it you are struggling with most? I prayed for help, and God seemed absent. I cannot understand why he would allow such devastation when I was faithful. You are assuming that God's presence is measured by whether he gives you what you ask for. Martha sipped her coffee. But what if God's presence is not about changing circumstances? What if it is about giving you strength to survive them and bringing people into your life to help you through? That is what Ethan said. He is a wise young man. He went through his own crisis of faith after his parents died. I told him then what I will tell you now. Faith is not a shield against hardship. It is a foundation that keeps you standing when hardship comes. And sometimes God works through people, through the kindness and love we show each other. Natalie thought about Ethan's help from the moment she arrived in Mineral Park, about Jack giving her a job, about the community at the dance welcoming her. None of it had been miraculous or dramatic, but it had been exactly what she needed. So you are saying God did answer my prayers, just not the way I expected? I am saying that maybe you are still here, still moving forward, still finding reasons to hope because God did not abandon you. He just worked in ways you were not looking for. Martha leaned forward. The fire took your home and your possessions, but you survived. You found help. You found work. You found a good man who cares for you. Those are not accidents, child. The perspective shifted something in Natalie's understanding. She had been so focused on what was lost that she had not fully appreciated what remained and what had been given. Her faith had been shaken, but maybe it was being rebuilt in a different form, one that was less about certainty and more about trust. Thank you, Natalie said. That helps more than you know. As they left Martha's house, Ethan took Natalie's hand as they walked. She has a gift for clarity. She does. I'm glad you brought me to meet her. They walked through town as the afternoon sun slanted gold across the buildings. Natalie felt lighter, as though a burden she had been carrying was gradually lessening. She was not sure she had her faith back completely, but she had something that felt like the beginning of it. That evening, Ethan stayed for supper at her cottage, the first time she had cooked just for the two of them. She made chicken and dumplings, one of her mother's recipes, and they ate by lamplight at her small table. "This is delicious," Ethan said. "Everything you cook is delicious. My mother taught me. She said the way to show love was through food and care." Natalie paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "I think she was right. There is love in taking time to prepare something good, in nourishing someone." "Then I am well loved." Ethan's eyes held hers across the table. "I think I am falling in love with you, Natalie. Actually, I think I already have." Her breath caught. She had known this was building, had felt it in every conversation and touch and shared moment, but hearing him say it made her heart race. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "It scares me, but I cannot seem to stop it." "Then do not stop it. Let yourself feel it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know I cannot replace what you lost. I would never try, but I can offer you something new, a future we build together." "What kind of future?" "Whatever kind we want. A home, a family, a life full of ordinary moments that add up to something extraordinary." He stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. "Marry me, Natalie. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. Say you will be my wife." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief she had shed so often. These were tears of hope, of unexpected joy. "Yes. Someday? Yes." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. Natalie leaned into him, letting herself trust this moment, this man, this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them. She was not healed completely from her losses. The grief still lived in her, probably always would. But alongside it now was love and hope and the beginning of faith renewed. They set a wedding date for late December, giving Natalie time to settle more fully into her new life and for them to plan properly. Jack gave his blessing enthusiastically, offering to host the wedding at the ranch. Martha helped Natalie sew a new dress, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan worked extra jobs to save money for a small house in town that needed repairs, but had good bones. On a clear, cold morning 2 days before Christmas, Natalie Preston became Natalie Walsh in a simple ceremony at Jack Morrison's ranch. The pastor from the church in Mineral Park officiated, and the small gathering included Jack, the ranch hands, Mrs. Chen, and her husband Martha, and a few other friends from town. Natalie wore her new dress with her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry that had survived the fire. Ethan wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable. When the pastor asked if she took Ethan to be her husband, Natalie spoke her vow with a clear voice, meaning every word. When Ethan slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her, she saw in his eyes the same commitment she felt in her own heart. They celebrated with a feast that Natalie had helped prepare the day before, tables laden with roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables, pies, and cakes. There was music and dancing, and for the first time since losing her parents, Natalie felt true joy. Not happiness despite grief, but joy that existed alongside it, neither one negating the other. That night, in the little house they would make their home, Ethan held her close and whispered, "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it. You helped me believe again. In love, in goodness, in the possibility of rebuilding. That is everything." Their first year of marriage was full of hard work and simple pleasures. Ethan continued working at the stable and picking up ranch jobs, while Natalie kept her position as Jack's housekeeper through an arrangement where she worked 3 days a week. The other days she spent fixing up their house, turning it into a real home with curtains and a garden and care in every detail. They attended church together on Sundays, and gradually Natalie found her faith returning in a form that felt more authentic than before. She prayed differently now, not bargaining with God, but simply talking, expressing gratitude for what she had and asking for strength to face challenges. She found comfort in the ritual and the community, in the way faith provided a framework for making sense of life's ups and downs. In the spring of 1884, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never forgotten her fear of loving and losing, and the thought of bringing a child into the world awakened all those anxieties. Ethan held her while she cried one night, overwhelmed by the emotions. "What if something happens?" she whispered. "What if I lose you, or the baby, or both?" "Then we will grieve," he said simply. "But we will not have wasted this time being afraid of what might happen. We will have loved fully and lived fully, and that will matter." His steadiness anchored her, as it had from the beginning. She carried the pregnancy with growing confidence, supported by Martha's wisdom, Mrs. Chen's practical help, and Ethan's unwavering presence. On a hot August morning, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Ethan's eyes and a strong set of lungs. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father. Holding her son for the first time, Natalie felt overwhelmed by love so fierce it hurt. This tiny person depended on her completely, trusted her absolutely. It was terrifying and wonderful. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, one finger stroking Samuel's tiny hand. "You are amazing. Look what we made." In the months that followed, Natalie discovered depths of exhaustion she had not known existed, but also depths of joy. Samuel's first smile, his babbling sounds, the way he fit perfectly against her shoulder, all of it filled her days with meaning. Ethan was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel at night when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, playing with him until they both laughed. Jack visited often, bringing small gifts and holding Samuel with the tenderness of someone who had lost his own chance at grandchildren. "Clara would have loved him," he said once, his eyes misty. "She always wanted the ranch filled with children." When Samuel was 6 months old, Natalie went back to working for Jack 2 days a week, bringing the baby with her. Jack insisted on paying her full wages despite the adjusted schedule, saying she had made his house a home again, and he would not lose her over logistics. Life settled into comfortable rhythms. The house in town became truly theirs, filled with Ethan's carpentry projects and Natalie's cooking and Samuel's laughter. They saved money slowly but steadily, planning for a future that included more children and perhaps a small piece of land of their own someday. On their second wedding anniversary, Ethan gave Natalie a leather-bound journal for writing down your thoughts or recipes or whatever you want. "I know you lost all your family records in the fire. This can be the start of new ones." She started writing that night, documenting their life together and Samuel's milestones. She wrote about the fire and the losses, not to dwell on them, but to remember and honor what had been. She wrote about meeting Ethan and how he had helped her believe again. She wrote about small daily joys and larger dreams for the future. In 1886, their second child was born, a daughter they named Clara after Jack's late wife. She had dark hair like Natalie and a calm temperament that made her an easy baby. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything. Jack cried when they told him the baby's name. "You honor me and my Clara's memory more than you know." Watching her family grow, Natalie often thought about faith and how it had evolved for her. She still had questions, still sometimes struggled with understanding God's plans. But she had learned that faith was less about having all the answers and more about trusting that love and goodness existed even in difficult times. She had learned that God worked through people, through the Ethans and Jacks and Marthas who showed up when needed most. In 1888, Ethan was offered a position managing a new ranch being established about 10 miles from Mineral Park. The pay was significantly better, and it included a house on the property. After discussing it carefully, they decided to take the opportunity. It would mean leaving the house in town they had worked so hard on, but it would also mean more security for their growing family. The ranch house was larger than what they were used to, with 4 bedrooms and a big kitchen. It needed work, but Ethan and Natalie threw themselves into making it home. They planted trees in a vegetable garden, built a chicken coop, and slowly acquired furniture and household goods. Jack visited regularly, claiming he needed to check on Clara's namesake, but clearly enjoying the company and the children's energy. Martha came for long visits, helping Natalie with canning and preserving as the garden produced. Mrs. Chen sent supplies from town with notes of encouragement. Their third child, a son they named James, was born in 1889. Then another daughter, Ruth, in 1891. The house filled with noise and love, with scraped knees and bedtime stories and prayers before meals. Natalie taught her daughters to cook and sew. Ethan taught his sons to ride and work with animals. Together, they raised their children with the values they cherished: hard work, kindness, faith, and the importance of family. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Ethan and Natalie would sit on the porch and talk, much as they had done during their courtship. Sometimes they discussed practical matters like finances or repairs needed around the ranch. Sometimes they dreamed about the future, about their children's lives and the grandchildren they might someday have. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived in Mineral Park?" Ethan asked one night in 1892. "How lost and alone you felt." "I think about it often. I was so broken, so certain my life was over." She leaned against him, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "I could not have imagined this, all of this. I am glad I happened to be at the stable that day. I think Martha would say it was not chance, that God put you there at exactly the right moment." "What do you think?" Natalie considered the question. "I think maybe she is right. I needed help believing again, and you were the one who could provide it. Not by preaching or explaining, but by showing me that good things were still possible, that I could love again without fear destroying me. Are you happy?" It was a question he asked sometimes, always with a trace of vulnerability, as though he feared her answer might change. "I am happy, content, grateful." She turned to look at him in the moonlight. "I miss my parents, and I always will. I still sometimes wonder why things happened the way they did. But I would not trade this life, our life, for anything. You gave me back my faith, and more importantly, you gave me a reason to use it." He kissed her forehead. "You gave me everything I did not know I was missing: a home, a family, a purpose beyond just getting by." In 1895, Jack Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 73. His will left the ranch to be sold, with a significant portion of the proceeds going to Natalie and Ethan. It was enough money to purchase their own land, to expand beyond managing someone else's property. They found a parcel 20 miles from Mineral Park, 300 acres of decent grazing land with water access. It was a risk, leaving the security of steady employment to strike out on their own, but their children were old enough to help with the work, and they had saved enough to buy cattle and equipment. The Walsh Ranch, as they called it, started small but grew steadily. Ethan's skill with horses and cattle, combined with Natalie's management of the household and finances, made them a formidable team. Their children learned the value of hard work, pitching in with chores and taking pride in what they were building together. Samuel grew into a serious young man who shared his father's love of horses. Clara was bright and determined, talking about becoming a teacher someday. James was the dreamer, always wandering off to explore. Ruth was still young, but showed signs of her mother's practical nature. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1897, Ethan surprised Natalie with a gift. He led her to the barn, where he had been working on something in secret for months. Inside stood a beautiful wooden chest, intricately carved with designs of flowers and vines. "Open it," he urged. Inside, the chest was divided into sections lined with felt. One section held her mother's Bible and the few photographs that had survived the fire. Another held the journal he had given her years ago, now filled with their story. The other sections were empty. "For storing the important things," Ethan explained. "Our marriage license, the children's birth records, letters, whatever matters to us. I know you lost everything once. This way, the most precious items will be protected. Natalie ran her hands over the smooth wood, emotion thick in her throat. It is beautiful. You made this? With help from Samuel. He did some of the carving. Ethan stood beside her. I wanted you to have something that would last, something to pass down to our children and their children, a reminder of what we built together. She turned and wrapped her arms around him. I love you. Thank you for this, for everything, for helping me believe again when I thought faith was lost forever. You did the hard work yourself. I just walked beside you. That was exactly what I needed. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and joys. Drought years tested their resilience, but they weathered them through careful planning and community support. Good years allowed them to expand the herd and improve their buildings. Their children grew up strong and capable, each finding their own path while remaining close to family. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and started his own small operation nearby. Clara did become a teacher, returning to Mineral Park to run the schoolhouse. James surprised everyone by developing a talent for blacksmithing, apprenticing in town. Ruth showed interest in medicine, corresponding with a female doctor in Phoenix who encouraged her studies. Natalie watched her children build their lives with pride and gratitude. She saw in them the legacy of faith and perseverance that had sustained her through the darkest times. They knew the story of how she had arrived in Mineral Park with nothing, how their father had helped her rebuild not just a life, but hope itself. On the quiet Sunday afternoons, the family gathered at the ranch house for dinner, the table overflowing with food and conversation. Grandchildren began arriving, first Samuel's twins, then Clara's daughter, bringing new life and energy. Natalie would watch Ethan playing with the grandchildren, his hair now streaked with gray, but his smile as warm as ever, and marvel at how far they had come. In 1905, Martha passed away at age 82. Her funeral was well attended, a testament to how many lives she had touched. Natalie spoke at the service, sharing how Martha had helped her understand that faith was not about perfect certainty, but about trust and community. It was Martha who had taught her to look for God's presence in the people who showed up when needed most. Standing at the cemetery, Natalie held Ethan's hand and thought about all the people who had shaped their journey, her parents whose love and teachings still guided her, Jack and Clara Morrison, who had given her a second chance, Martha, who had provided wisdom and perspective, and Ethan, always Ethan, who had stood beside her through everything. That evening, back at the ranch, their extended family gathered. The house rang with laughter and stories, with children playing and adults catching up. Natalie looked around at the life she had rebuilt from ashes and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, finding her standing alone on the porch. "That I am blessed, that my faith was shaken but never broken, just transformed into something stronger." She leaned into him. "That you were right all those years ago. Help came through people showing up when I needed them most, and the most important person who showed up was you. We showed up for each other. We still do." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Natalie Preston Walsh knew with absolute certainty that her life had meaning and purpose. The fire had taken her past, but it had not taken her future. She had lost everything once, but she had gained something infinitely more valuable, a love that had helped her believe again, a family built on faith and commitment, and a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges and joys. Their children would continue growing, their grandchildren would multiply, and eventually they would face the ordinary sorrows of aging. But none of that diminished the fundamental truth that had sustained her since that desperate day in 1882, when a cowboy in a dusty stable had offered unexpected kindness. Sometimes faith gets shaken. Sometimes everything falls apart. But if you let people in, if you allow yourself to hope and love and believe again, life rebuilds itself in ways more beautiful than you could have imagined. That was the story Natalie would pass down to her children and grandchildren, written in the journal Ethan had given her and lived out in the family they had created together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from all around, filling the property with wagons and horses and love. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories and toasts. Samuel gave a speech about his parents' enduring love. Clara read a poem she had written. James presented them with a horseshoe he had forged with their initials intertwined. Ruth, now studying medicine in Phoenix, traveled home to be there. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Natalie and Ethan stood together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They had gray in their hair now, and lines around their eyes, marks of a life fully lived. Their hands were still work-worn, their bodies shaped by years of labor. But they stood strong together, partners in every sense. 25 years, Natalie said softly. When you proposed that night in my cottage, did you imagine all of this? I imagine loving you. The rest has been better than any dream. Ethan pulled her close. You have made me happier than I knew was possible. You saved me. You helped me believe again when I thought faith was gone forever. We saved each other. That is what love does. They stood there in the peaceful evening, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, the faith they had nurtured through good times and bad. The losses of the past had shaped them, but not defined them. The grief had mellowed into bittersweet memory. What remained was love, strong and enduring, a testament to the power of showing up for each other every single day. In the house behind them, their children and grandchildren finished cleaning up from the celebration, their voices carrying through the open windows. The ranch stretched around them, 300 acres of land they had turned into a thriving operation through hard work and partnership. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as always, but faced together. Natalie leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling his steady heartbeat, and sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. Not the desperate bargaining prayers of her youth, but a simple expression of gratitude for the journey that had led her here. For the fire that had destroyed everything but forced her to rebuild stronger, for the grief that had shaken her faith but ultimately deepened it, for the cowboy who had looked at a broken woman and seen someone worth helping, worth loving, worth building a life beside. Her faith had been shaken after losing everything, but a cowboy had said maybe he could help her believe again. And in the end, he had done exactly that, not by fixing what was broken, but by walking beside her while she healed, by loving her through the doubts and fears, by showing her that faith was not about certainty, but about trust and hope and the courage to keep building even after everything falls apart. That was the legacy they would leave their children and grandchildren, not perfect faith, but resilient faith. Not a life without hardship, but a life that persevered through hardship. Not love that never struggled, but love that chose each other every single day, through the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones, through loss and joy, through doubt and belief. As the stars brightened overhead and the night settled around them, Natalie Preston Walsh stood beside Ethan Walsh and knew with absolute certainty that her life had been well lived, that her faith had been restored, and that love had been worth every risk. The girl who had fled a burning ranch with nothing but grief and broken faith had become a woman with a full heart, a strong family, and a belief in goodness that no hardship could shake again. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a promise fulfilled. And it had started with such a simple thing, a kind word from a stranger, an offer of help, a willingness to believe that something good could grow from ashes. That was faith. That was love. That was everything that mattered.